is September 2nd, 2012. I'm Doris Montag, and behind the camera we have Mark Less. We are on the site of the Cedar Valley Engine Show in Charles City, Iowa, and our purpose today is to record the story of relocating a Watts engine to the club grounds in 2005. I'm going to turn it over to Kelly to introduce the members and to talk about the team that went on the project.
Yeah, my name's Kelly Barnett, and across from me is Jason Skillen, Steve Montag, Steve Smollett. Back in 2004, late 2003, we had heard through the museum in Charles City about an old stationary steam engine that we could possibly acquire for display out to our showgrounds. They didn't have the facility or room to place it at the museum. They thought it would be a good fit for out here at our showgrounds. At the time, we were only told that it was an old engine, older than the one we already had, but that was about all the information we had. We sent a contingent of people out to take a look at the engine. That was out in Des Plaines, Illinois. The contact person we had was Charlie Thompson. He was an attorney for the Dual Corporation out in Chicago. And his roots tied back to Charles City, is where he graduated from. And through the conversations with him, we set up a time frame where we could go out and look at it. And the original people out and looked at it was Howard Shanks. He was from the Ames area. Mike Shanks, his brother, from North Springs. Steve Montag from North Springs. Wayne Pop from Charles City. And Harold Swartrock from Charles City. After they had opportunity to go out and look at it, they came back, and at our next meeting for the members on a Thursday evening, it was brought up that they had went out there, Chicago, and looked at it, and whether it would be worth our time to acquire this engine. And kind of a short answer said it would be kind of foolish not to. It was then understood with the brochures they brought back the significance historically and mechanically on how it affected our industrial revolution through time. From that point, we were able to set up another time frame and also organize it between us members on going out and acquiring the engine and what it would take to dismember it, catalog it, and bring it back to this area in northeastern Iowa. In that group of people, we had the original 5 that went out to look at the engine, which was Howard, Mike, Harold, Wayne, and Steve. Outside of that, myself went out, Jason Skillen went out, Raleigh Endelman went out as well, went out as a group of 8 to tear the engine apart and bring it back to this area. The main reason why we were given the chance at the engine is that Leighton Wilkie had passed away. The foundation was doing away with a lot of its older artifacts, and the facility this engine was in was going to be demolished. They had sold the property, and they had X amount of time before the building was going to be demolished. The attorney was Charlie Thompson for the company, and being that his roots were from Charles City, he wanted to see the engine back to Charles City area as an opportunity to help promote our area history. They had Sotheby's auction house come in and look at the archives that Leighton had put together, and at the time they could put a value on everything else that was in their collection, but when it got to the Watts engine, they couldn't put a value on it. They said it wasn't worth anything other than scrap weight. They, of course, were used to high-end antiques and collectibles. They didn't understand the importance industrially and historically what this engine represented. Therefore, that's where Charlie chimed in and jumped on the bandwagon, and we were able to acquire the engine.
So was it donated? What was your financial arrangement?
At the time, it was one of those things to where if we wanted it, it was ours. Plain and simple. All we had to do was find out some way of going and getting it, which is kind of floating variable into the respect that we had no idea what the costs were going to entail going out and getting this. At the time, all we had was a brochure that showed a view of this room that was in, and it was a barrel roofed room that this engine was sitting in. And here this engine was down the lower right corner of this picture. And after the fellows got back that we initially sent out, we found out that the floor to ceiling height in the room was 70 feet. So it was a huge room that this engine was sitting in. So the scope and the size was a little deceiving. Seeing this little engine sitting in the corner, we thought, well, this would be nothing. Well, come to find out that the walking beam was 16 feet above the floor where it was sitting, and the span of it, and it was a rather sizable engine. So once we had figured out, okay, Harold could bring a trailer, Mike could bring a trailer, Steve could bring a trailer. Okay, now we've got 3 trailers heading out to Chicago. We get the approximate wrenches that we need, that we think we're going to need to tear it apart, shrink wrap, markers, pens, all the stuff we think we need. We were fortunate to have another club member and his son come out, Fred Beeson, Larry Beeson. They came out while we were out there as well with their truck and trailer and helped bring some components of the engine back as well.
What did people think when they saw the engine?
It was one of those things to where it was almost awe-inspiring is one way to put it, but it was almost one of those things, almost surreal, because it was one of those things when we found out how old it was. We're so used to things that were built around 1900 and after, to where now we're dealing with something that was built in the 1700s, and having a 100-year jump back farther in time than what we're used to, and seeing the size and the mass of this engine, how it was designed, it was just unreal.
Did you think about turning around and coming home?
No, because we're all old iron hounds and stuff, and nuts and enthusiasts, and the task at hand was preservation, first and foremost. We wanted to make sure that something like this got saved and wasn't scrapped, because we had found out when we were out there that they had a half-scaled version of a Newcomen engine that was an older steam engine yet, but an exact half-scale replica, working model, that they had let sit outside for many years and deteriorated to the point where they just scrapped it out. And it was a working, functional model. And it was to the point where it was going to happen to this as well. When the building came down, it was going to get scrapped.
Are there any others in the United States?
To our knowledge, this is the most complete, what they call a rotating crankshaft engine for a James Watt engine in the United States. There are some older walking beam steam engines in the country. There's a couple at the Ford Dearborn Museum. There's an incomplete Watt engine out in Colorado, in the Colorado Springs area. So there are other representations of it, but this particular design is the only one of its kind in the country. And you think at that time, things were evolving so fast that no 2 engines are alike. Each one will have its differences to it.
So talk about how you organized yourselves to break it down.
When we got out there, it was more or less understanding what had to be done, the small components, but how to dismember the engine. We had some brochures that they had printed up for their tours that they gave through this place. This was their museum for their company at the time. Leighton Wilkie's Pride and Joy was this Industrial Revolution museum that he had acquired or accumulated over the years. So we took those brochures, a couple of them, and started marking pages and numbering different components of the engine. And as we took the engine apart, we made sure those parts were numbered accordingly to how we marked them in the books. But it was one of the things to where different guys were given different tasks. Okay, we're going to work over here, you're going to work over there, and you're going to work cataloging over here as things come off, and large parts over here, small parts over there, to where we had an understanding. Initially, we didn't know how we were going to get the engine apart because there was no large overhead doors to get into the building. It was a garage door that we could get into. And this engine was a little bit shorter than it is in our building here, but we still had no way of getting reached up to the walking beam to get it off for equipment. We were fortunate there was a crane rental place and a repair place right next door to where we were at, and by happenstance, their maintenance department, the Dual Company, talked to them, went over and talked to them, and they came over and saw what we were dealing with, and they had a wonderful old crane, old red Ford industrial powered crane that they drove in there and parked and picked the parts right off for us. And we worked around their schedule because we didn't want to intrude on what they were doing for making money in their own business. So that's how we were
And
able
you
to.
understand that they essentially donated their
Yes.
time.
Yep.
Talk about the clown, as you call him.
Well, it's what he did. I called him. He was a PR man, and what he did, if we needed anything, we would go to Charlie and we would get anything we needed. And his second job was he was a clown on the side, and he played that right to a T because he was a clown. He was pretty comical.
We were given free reins of 2 forklifts that the facility had. They were at our full disposal, and then when the guys with the crane came back, we were able to utilize them at their fullest extent too. So we were very fortunate because we had talked about having to go somewhere and rent a backhoe or two to come in and be able to utilize it to tear this engine apart.
Which would not have worked at all because
And
it
our-
was so massive.
And our cost expense would have gone up dramatically.
How many pounds or how many tons does it weigh?
We figure,
don't know. Lots. We don't know.
yeah, we really don't know the tonnage. It was one of those things to where when it was fully dismembered, loaded on trailers, we knew everyone had good loads on their trailers, especially when we were hitting western Illinois, coming down towards the Mississippi River, and the brakes were getting warm on pickups and trailers.
I could see smoke coming out of Shanks' and that's not good.
So we know it weighs a lot,
Yeah, the biggest
but it was not one of those things where we went across any scales and we never weighed anything. It's just, yeah, we knew it was heavy, and
We assumed that the flywheel weighed about 8 ton alone just in the flywheel.
8 ton?
you've got 8 individual spokes, 8 individual segments that come apart into each segments. And the look of the design and the characteristics of how they made an engine, this size and scale at that time in history, to look at is fascinating how they figured everything out, how to do it.
Well, I think it's important that we note that, of course, it was before we had standardized nuts and bolts. So you had to label every location and every hole and every nut and bolt had to be coded together.
Every wedge, every brass piece was made to fit for certain areas of the engine.
And how did you keep that organized?
That's where the shrink wrap and magic markers
Okay.
came in handy. And it was still one of those things to where, okay, now we have everything set in place, we're assembling the engine, now, okay, we're putting this together, well, this doesn't fit quite right. Well, it must be this other piece over here for the wedge to fit into this place, and that's how everything went back together. It was a reverse process. It took us 3 days to dismember it, and it took us a little bit longer to put it back together.
We were lucky enough to be able to figure out how the flywheel was riveted together, and we were able to drill the rivets out and hammer out the other end of the rivet. Take the flywheel apart in sections carefully because it's cast, it's old, it's brittle, and each piece was labeled so that they were forged years ago and they were put together, so each piece had to go together back on that flywheel
Because
the same way it came off.
every joint on the ring of the flywheel is lap seam with 2 hot pins put through, and they were hot beamed just to connect the 2 pieces. So every time one of those halves came apart, it got labeled as such. So when they went back together, we knew how it went back together.
So you were having drawings and taking photographs.
Oh, yes.
And shrink wrapping and magic marking
Yeah.
to keep the story together.
And in many cases, trying to put the bolt back into the hole with the nut on it, so that this bolt
was
was
together.
in this hole, and then shrink back it so that it didn't get lost on the way home.
The hub of the flywheel isn't perfect, so that the spokes going well when it was first constructed, and also when it went back together, they weren't formed perfectly. So back when it was first put together, back in the 50s, I should say, back when Wilkie put it together, they used a material that was kind of like a paste, cement, and that was how they were put together, and that's how it was balanced, so that it did turn perfectly.
Was it operating in the museum?
It
Or
could
able
have
to be-
worked, but it was only by a chain of an electric motor
Okay.
underneath. The cylinder on it, the top of the head of the cylinder is cracked. So it will never run again.
in its current state.
Now, how did it get to that museum? Let's cover that.
Back in the 40s and early 50s, Leighton Wilkie was putting together a museum for industrial technology and history, and he went over to England in 55, 56, and corresponded, and he tracked this engine down. It was still in the textile mill. It was erected back in the late 1700s, and he bought it right out of the basement of the building it was in.
Found himself some farmers with some tools, went and got it.
Lord knows it'd been very interesting to see how he extracted it out of the building what it was in. There was a couple photographs taken where it was housed in the building in England, and it didn't look, there wasn't near as much room as what we had to work with. So how they were able to dismember it and extract it, that part's lost in time. We do have some correspondence from Leighton Wilkie back to his secretary in the Dual Company while he was over in Europe looking for items and articles when he acquired this piece. But the fine points on how they dismembered and brought over, I don't know. And it isn't any of the information we have.
Is there anything more about what you call dismembering that you would want to?
One thing I thought was unique when we had to get them spokes out of there, nobody really knew what to expect and what to do. We thought them pins was like a rivet, and we thought we could just drill the end off, and it didn't work out like that. It was a pretty intense program to get them pins out of there. We had to drill each one and then drill another hole, get the end drilled out, and then just pound it out.
How'd that go?
It wasn't quite that.
You make it sound so easy.
Well, after the first one, it got a little better.
After we figured out after the first seam and stuff, from there it was more, okay, just repeat this, and things went easier as it went along.
A work in progress.
Those rivets are countersunk, so that the rivet itself is only a 3/4 inch diameter rivet, but the heads were approximately 1.25 inches. So do we have 1.25 inch hole all the way through? What have we got here? Well, it took a little time for us to figure out that we had a countersunk head, and the back end was countersunk too. We had to get down to that 3/4 inch. And once we figured that out, and that was all trial and error because we had absolutely no blueprints or anything to tell us that. Once we got figured out that, we got to get that big countersunk head off of there, and started with a 1/4 inch bit, then a 1/2 inch bit, and then drilled it out to a 3/4, and if we were exactly in the center, we'd hit that pin and the head would come off. So, but Jason, I helped push on the drill too a little, but Jason did most of that.
I think we did 32 of them.
Yeah.
We drilled every one of them out.
Yeah.
32 seams on the flywheel?
32 pins.
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 Yeah, 32 pins.
So once you got it back here, talk about how many years did it take and what was it like to try to put it back together?
We actually went after it in April, I believe, and got it home, got it back here. We had 3 trailers that went with us, and 1 trailer that came later in that week. So we had 4 trailer loads here. I think there was 2 more trips back to Chicago for the rest of it. And we did nothing before showtime. After our show at Labor Day, we dug the hole for the pit. And
Because while we were out there, we took all the measurements of the base this engine was sitting on to mirror it to what we had to do out here. Being it was already done there, we did all the dimensions and measuring while we were out there so we knew what to do back here once we got back.
And how deep is the pit?
Ours isn't as deep as it was out there because they're out in Chicago. The crankshaft was at floor level, and out here it's 3 foot above ground level. So we're not as deep in that respect.
On a 16-foot flywheel.
Yeah.
So the bottom, when we crawl down in the hole, we're probably 7 foot below the top of the ground when we're walking around on the cement. We didn't want to go any deeper than that because deeper we went, the more water problems we was going to have. So we kind of raised it up on the ground.
And raising the engine makes it easier for people to see the mechanics of it all that much better.
So that got done in the fall. Then after the show, the cement work, and we actually hired the cement work done. And in the spring then, and it was still cold and still snow on the ground, we came over here and started figuring out where the flywheel has to set on these slabs of cement, and started drilling holes in the cement to hold the bearings in, and started putting it together. And by showtime we had it together. By Labor Day we had it together. We didn't have a roof over our building yet, but we had it together. And as we said, every nut and bolt had to go back on the same place. Somehow, some of the bolts got mixed up, and Mr. Shanks and I sat one Sunday afternoon when it's got 90 degrees. We sat way up on top there, trying to figure out which nut went on which bolt for about 3 hours, just sitting up there, you know, and watching the traffic go by. Oh, it was a challenge. And of course, we had to get we actually got an excavator in here and set all of these heavy pieces into place, because we couldn't get anything close enough. Since we had a pit here, we couldn't get anything close enough with like forklift kind of stuff, so we had to get an excavator in here that could reach out a ways and set those pieces. And, it's a lot of fun, it's a lot of work.
But from the April of '05, when you went...
Yeah, we got it up, and really nobody was hurt. There was times when it could have happened, but God willing, it didn't. We got it up.
We didn't lose anybody.
And nobody got hurt. There were some blue times.
Oh yeah.
So wouldn't you say it's really one of your greatest novelties? I mean, for this engine club to have a Watts engine, the only one in this working order in the United States, has to be, you know, a pretty proud thing.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
One of the crowning achievements of the club, kind of one of our pride and joys. Once it was here, the agreement now with, is my understanding, with the Dual company, with the foundation, is that if they will get it back if anything ever happens to the club, to make sure it gets preserved, because that's their foremost interest in it as well, that it gets preserved.
Okay.
But the national or the world or national notoriety we've gotten from having it, just having it out in a few minor publications, I would say. People from England have called or inquired to us, not so much called, but through email, through snail mail as well, inquiring about the engine. We've had people stop here throughout the summers inquiring about it. We feel very privileged having it.
Well, I've been here at times where people from a long, long distance have come to the show because of the Watts engine. And usually Jason is here, you know, to tour him around, tell a story.
Tell stories.
Even last summer, you told us that you had some kids come in here that were just starting to learn of J.J. Watts, and you're like, "This is him. Put your book down and look at this."
They'd never seen it. They just had seen in books and stuff, and I said, "You're seeing the real thing. This is it."
it's one of those things. It's hard for people to comprehend and fathom the idea that this was built in before 1800 and understand the significance of it. Not only this piece, but even the boring bar that we were able to acquire with the engine, the John Wilkinson's, that worked right in hand more or less with James Watt on being able to make a fairly functional and fairly efficient steam engine at that time in history.
And then it was used in textile manufacturing?
It was used as primary power in a textile mill in England for over 120 years. In the teens, early 20s, it was put in standby service because the company had installed a diesel engine as their primary power source. After that, if the diesel engine had issues, they would also utilize this engine when needed. Therefore, it was still in place when Leighton Wilkie bought it.
Wow. So what is next for the engine? Is it possible for it to be, I suppose I'd say, converted so that you could run it?
The short-term ideas right now is to configure a drive mechanism similar to what they had in Chicago, to where it would be direct coupled to a gear reduction unit with electric motor, at least to rotate the engine to show its functionality and how everything worked together. It's also been up for debate with different individuals on snowballing ideas and seeing, just shooting for the moon, thinking, well, it could be possible in the future to tear part of it apart and fix what's broken on it and actually make it functional again.
By steam?
Yes.
Steam function.
Yep.
Steam work compressed air.
Well, it's made out of pretty sturdy parts, it seems. So
They're old.
yeah, I mean, it would seem like regular wear might be bad.
It is highly possible. We never for sure figured out if it has its piston inside of it.
Oh, I'm pretty confident that the piston is inside
It's inside
It
the
is in-
cylinder.
because it's too balanced
Weight-wise.
weight-wise.
There was correspondence or stories I heard that the people that worked in a textile mill would have contests in the maintenance department. They would ride the flywheel from one revolution to the next and see who could do it and who couldn't in the textile mill.
Oh,
So yeah, there was entertainment value even back then
entertainment
in
and
the
if you
1800s.
couldn't, you just fell down.
You
and
just
hoped
laid in the
didn't
bottom of the
lay
pit and you had to come
knock
back up.
yourself out.
But if you look at the engine, you're able to get here and see how it was constructed with the wooden teeth and the beveled gear that's on the crankshaft. It's a two-piece beveled gear on the crankshaft with wooden teeth that are pinned. It was made for longevity, easy repair, and quiet operation.
What else would you like to record about the engine
Well,
and the club's effort?
we've got to think back to its original. It's got a date on it of 1799. It's the first machine power steam unit, that is, with a perfectly round cylinder. Mr. Watts made a perfectly round cylinder. And it is what started the Industrial Revolution. This Watts started it all. And that's what Leighton Wilkie brought up in his sunburst picture or
That
Wall
display
museum.
above this Watts engine. And that's the main thing that a person must never ever forget about it, is that this unit is the beginning of what started the Industrial Revolution for the world. It started it. And we've got it, and we're preserving it for the future. We may not hold it forever. You know, you don't really own nothing. You're just the caretaker of it for now. But we
But
saved it from what could have happened is cut up. And it's a good thing that Hitler didn't find it during World War II, because he wanted to find it. Because that was the part of what kept England going in that textile mill. That was one of the targets. He was after it there too. So we're lucky to have it different. We've saved it. They've saved it. And we have to keep it for the world, because it's the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. It's start.
And words can't put true justice to the efforts and the time that people have put into saving an engine like this. Not only with our club members, but also the people that came before, especially Leighton Wilkie, the crews that he most likely hired, but had working with him, the people from England, the preservationists that we like to associate ourselves with. Enough thanks can't go out for individuals like that.
One thing I see is they say that this thing, we're out in the middle of nowhere. And they have something like this here, they say it's an honor and stuff, you know, to have it. It ought to be by museums or somewhere. And we're out here, you know, in the middle of nowhere, and we got something like this.
But I can't imagine that, you know, it could have just been in a museum without the full-heartedness, you know, of you folks heading on out there and dismantling this. You know, it would cost a lot of money for someone to do it. Now let's ask that question. What do you think?
Well, we had quite an adventure. We went down in, what was unique to, when we pulled that piece out of down there, we had to climb through the building to get to it, and to actually see that underneath what that was just, it blew your mind to see it, how much of the old building had started, and then they put more of it over to it and they added. To see that down in there, you wondered where you was, you know, it was down in there. And then we had the motor set behind it, and to get the crankshaft out of there, it was a job to pick that up so they could bring that out, you know. That was pretty neat.
The club in general is so indebted to the individuals that put forth the effort and time, not only here from our members, but also the other individuals in the groups that we touched base with when we were out there in Des Plaines, Illinois, the suburb of Chicago when we got it. They're memories that we won't ever forget.
Hadn't been for Charlie Thompson, we wouldn't even know about it.
Yep.
That's flat out. If it hadn't been for Charlie Thompson, we wouldn't even know about it.
The following year after we got it, I had made comment to a fellow at Mount Pleasant at their show in their stationary steam building, just inquiring what they knew about a walking beam steam engine. And he's been helping with their display and facility on there for quite a number of years, and he said, "Oh, kind of questioned me. Well, why? Why do you ask?" I said, "Well, the group I'm with, we have one. I was just kind of wondering what you knew." "Well, where are you at?" Where are you at? I said, "Well, northeastern Iowa." "Where'd you find it?" And it's one of those things where they had been looking for one for decades, and they had never found one. And I told them the kind of story behind it, and they were just flabbergasted. They didn't understand, and they couldn't believe that we were able to acquire and they knew the significance of an engine such as this. They've got some fantastic engines in their display. We had the Norberg engine since the mid-'80s in our display out here. But to add to what these guys have said, to understand, and us in the old iron arena understand is the magnitude of what the significance of this engine really means. That really hits home when people like that know it and understand it.
Any other comments? Any other names we should include?
I'm sure we'll hear about it, but right offhand, no.
Well, another unique thing is it shut off. As we was coming into it, you could still see them building bandsaw blades. They was off to this side, and they yet knew they probably wasn't had a job, but we wasn't supposed to tell them. And you could see them. You'd walk by where they was putting the bandsaw blades together, and you could see them, and they would watch you come in. I think after the third day, they knew something was up because they see us with our little tools in our pails, and we'd walk to it. Well, they knew it's something, and pretty soon pieces started going by them, and that got their attention.
The executives in the facility out there, their corporate offices were still in this building when we were working out there. And they were having corporate meetings over in the boardroom, and after the second day when we were there, the president of the company walked by and talked to Howard Shanks. And asked him who we were and how we knew each other and stuff. And he kind of explained, well, there's a truck driver, a guy works at a feed mill, auto parts salesman, a guy works for a county department, a couple farmers, a guy used to work at a university in Iowa and stuff. And none of us really know each other outside of the showgrounds and this hobby. And he said, well, why? He asked the president of the company, well, why do you ask? He said, we've never seen a group of guys work together so well that just get thrown together. He said, you guys, you aren't tripping over each other. Everything's flowing so smoothly, and it just come off seamlessly. It only took us 3 days to dismember this engine.
I think that's pretty phenomenal.
One of the stories that I heard the last day, I think, when we were there was when we came in carrying our buckets of wrenches, the custodians, maintenance people, whatever they were called, they were asked to take care of us, and as Jason said, whatever we need, why you help them guys out. One of the comments that they made amongst themselves that we never heard this till the last day was, them farmers will be here for 2 weeks taking that engine apart. 3 days later, it was loaded on trailers, and the rest, the balance, what we couldn't get on the trailers, was laying on floor and ready to come home.
Laying on floors or pallets.
Yes,
Pallets.
it was all done. It was all apart. They just could not believe that them farmers with them buckets of wrenches take that engine apart in 3 days. So, I mean, we surprised him, I think. I think we might have surprised ourselves, too.
And you remember right at the end, and when we had it done, they said we forgot the boring bar, that had to go with
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
That was outside, we'd
It was
never
outs-
seen it.
We had never seen
know
the
a thing
boring
about
bar. It was sitting
Never knew a
outside
thing
behind
about
the
it.
building, and we had to get a forklift around there to snag it.
Yeah.
And
Yes, I
sitting
do.
on the boring bar was another cylinder that Leighton Wilkie had made from the cylinder on the engine. He had just, when it was dismembered, when they brought it back over, he had in his mind to reproduce the boring bar that helped machine the cylinder. So they had another cylinder completely cast, so they could set one in a display model in a refabricated boring bar setup to explain how the cylinder was machined for the James Watt steam engine.
Wow. A visionary.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Someday, somehow, we would like to make this thing turn, make it walk. Doesn't have to walk fast. Just see that walking beam go this way. Just how we're going to accomplish that, I don't know. There's a lot of theories out there on how to make that work, and we gotta get our priorities right here.
To our
Just do it.
benefit, in that respect, it's as complete as it is. If it wasn't, it may never been an opportunity, it may be a chance for us to do it. But being as complete as it is, we have that opportunity and potential chance on doing that with the engine.